Ezra's hand wrapped around the microphone, and for a split second, he forgot how to breathe. The ballroom was silent. 200 faces stared at him from their seats. Tech entrepreneurs in tailored suits, investors with watches that cost more than he'd seen in a year, and women in dresses that shimmered under the chandeliers. And there he stood, in jeans that hadn't been washed in a week, a jacket with a torn pocket and shoes held together by duct tape he'd found behind a gas station. Security was already moving toward the stage. He could see the guard's hand reaching for his radio, the quick glance toward the event organizer. Ezra had maybe 10 seconds before they pulled him off that stage and escorted him out of the Grand Millennium Hotel in Buckhead. 10 seconds to make a choice that would either humiliate him in front of Atlanta's elite or change everything. He opened his mouth. "My name is Ezra Webb," he said, voice cracking slightly. "And I'm not supposed to be here." The security guard stopped. The room leaned in. "I walked 3 miles from downtown Atlanta to get to this hotel. Not because I had a ticket, not because I'm an entrepreneur with a pitch. I walked here because I was hungry." He paused, letting that word hang in the air. "But I didn't come up here to beg. I came to show you something. Something I've been preparing for 8 months on the streets of this city, even though I had no idea if this moment would ever come." A woman in the third row wiped her eye. A man in a gray suit leaned forward, and Ezra, who hadn't felt seen in months, finally felt like someone was actually looking at him. But let's back up, because what happened in that ballroom didn't start that day. It started 8 months earlier when Ezra lost everything. Before we go any further, do me a favor. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching this from. I want to know who's here with me for this story. And if you appreciate real stories about resilience, people who refuse to give up even when everything falls apart, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel, because every single week I bring you stories that will shift how you think about success, preparation, and what it really takes to change your life. All right, let's get back to Ezra. 8 months before that microphone, before that stage, before everything changed, Ezra Webb was stocking shelves at a warehouse in South Atlanta. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't the life he'd imagined when he was younger, writing poetry in notebooks during high school English class, dreaming about being a storyteller, maybe even performing on stages someday. But it paid the bills. It kept a roof over his head in a small one-bedroom apartment off Metropolitan Parkway. It was enough. Until it wasn't. The layoffs came on a Tuesday. "Budget cuts," the manager said. "Nothing personal." 23 people let go in one afternoon, Ezra among them. He walked out of that warehouse with a cardboard box containing a coffee mug, a hoodie, and a final paycheck that wouldn't even cover next month's rent. He told himself it would be fine. He'd find another job. Atlanta was growing. There were opportunities everywhere. He filled out applications until his fingers cramped. He rode the MARTA train to interviews in borrowed dress shirts, sitting in waiting rooms with other desperate people, all of them pretending they weren't desperate. Nothing came through. His savings evaporated. First the car insurance payment, then the utilities, then the groceries. He started eating 1 meal a day, then every other day. He sold his TV, his laptop, his couch. He called his old friend from high school, but the conversation went awkward and cold when Ezra tried to explain his situation. Pride kept him from pushing further. When the eviction notice came, Ezra stared at it for an hour. He had 12 days to come up with $1,500 a leave. He didn't have $1,500. He didn't have $15. On day 11, he packed everything he owned into 2 duffel bags and a backpack. On day 12, he walked out of that apartment and didn't look back. For the first week, he stayed on his friend Derek's couch. Derek was kind but uncomfortable. His girlfriend didn't hide her annoyance. After 6 days, Ezra left before Derek had to ask him to leave. He tried a shelter downtown, but it was full. He tried another on the west side, also full. A caseworker told him to come back the next day at 5 a.m. to get in line. That night, Ezra slept under the I-85 overpass. The concrete was cold. The sound of traffic above him was relentless, a constant roar that made sleep nearly impossible. He curled up with his backpack as a pillow, his duffel bags clutched against his chest, terrified someone would steal them. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound he flinched. He didn't sleep that first night. He just stared at the underside of the interstate and wondered how his life had come to this.
He learned that when people look at you on the street, they don't really see you. They see a problem, an inconvenience, a cautionary tale. He'd watch businessmen in sharp suits walk past him, their eyes sliding away the moment they registered his presence. Women would clutch their purses tighter. Teenagers would laugh and film him on their phones. Once, a man spat at his feet and called him a waste of space. Ezra stopped making eye contact. But here's the thing about Ezra that nobody knew, that nobody could see from the outside. While he was fighting to survive, while he was scraping for his next meal and finding places to sleep that wouldn't get him arrested, he was also doing something else. He was writing. In his backpack, underneath the spare shirt and the bottle of water and the granola bars he'd saved from the soup kitchen, Ezra carried a notebook. It was worn and weathered, the cover stained, the pages warped from being caught in the rain one night, but it was his. And every night after he found a spot to sleep, under the overpass, in a doorway on Peachtree, behind a dumpster in Midtown, he'd pull out that notebook and write. Spoken word poetry, raw, unfiltered pieces about struggle and dignity and invisibility and hope. He'd been writing poetry since he was 15, performing at open mics when he was in his 20s, back when he thought maybe he could make something of it. Life had gotten in the way. Work, bills, responsibilities. The poetry became a hobby, then a memory. But on the streets, it became a lifeline. He'd write about what it felt like to be hungry, not just physically hungry, but hungry for opportunity, for a second chance, for someone to see him as more than a burden. He wrote about the shame of asking for help, the exhaustion of pretending to be okay, the small moments of kindness that kept him going, a woman who bought him a sandwich without being asked, a shelter worker who remembered his name. And he practiced. Late at night, when the city was quieter, he'd recite his pieces out loud, whispering at first, self-conscious even though no one was around, then louder, finding the rhythm, the emotion, the cadence. He'd perform to the empty air, to the concrete walls, to himself. No audience, no applause, just Ezra and his words and the faint hope that maybe, somehow, they'd matter someday. He didn't know when, he didn't know how. He just knew he had to keep building, keep preparing, keep holding on to the one thing that made him feel like he was still Ezra Webb and not just another invisible man on the street. Most mornings, Ezra would walk, not aimlessly, but with purpose, even if that purpose was just to stay warm or find his next meal. He'd pass churches with their signs about hope and redemption, and he'd wonder if hope was real or just something people said to make themselves feel better. He'd pass restaurants where the smell of food would make his stomach cramp, and he'd keep walking. He'd pass office buildings where people his age walked in with briefcases and coffee cups, living the life he used to have, and he tried not to think about how quickly everything could fall apart. But he also passed performance venues, the Fox Theater, the Tabernacle, small clubs and little 5 Points where poets and musicians performed for crowds who actually paid to be there. He'd stop outside sometimes, listening to the muffled sound of voices and applause from within, imagining what it would feel like to be on that stage, to have people listen, to have his words mean something to someone other than himself. One night, standing outside a club on Edgewood Avenue, Ezra made a promise. He didn't say it out loud, but he felt it deep in his chest. If he ever got one chance, any chance, to show people what he could do, he wouldn't waste it. He wouldn't beg for sympathy. He'd offer something real, something built from all these months of pain and practice and survival. He just needed one opportunity. And on a Thursday morning in late September, 8 months after he lost his apartment, that opportunity came. Ezra woke up that Thursday morning to the sound of rain hitting the overpass above him. Not hard rain, just a steady drizzle that made everything damp and cold. He sat up slowly, his back aching from sleeping on concrete, and checked his belongings. Both duffel bags still there, backpack intact, the notebook tucked safely inside, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag to keep it dry. He had slept maybe 3 hours. A police car had rolled through around 2 a.m., and Ezra pretended to be asleep while his heart hammered in his chest. They didn't stop. They never did, unless someone complained. But the adrenaline kept him awake for another hour after they left. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon, a bowl of soup and 2 crackers at Central Presbyterian. Today was Thursday, which meant the Gateway Center would have dinner at 5. 9 hours was a long time when you were hungry. Ezra stood, stretched, felt his joints crack. He was 34 years old and felt 50. He grabbed his backpack, left the duffel bags hidden behind a concrete pillar. He'd come back for them later, and started walking. He didn't have a destination in mind. That was the thing about being homeless. Every day was just movement. Walking to stay warm, walking to kill time, walking because sitting in one place too long made people nervous, made them call the cops, made them treat you like a problem that needed removing. He walked north on Piedmont Avenue, past the closed storefronts and early morning joggers who gave him a wide berth on the sidewalk. He walked through Midtown, where the buildings got taller and the cars got nicer. He walked until his feet hurt, and then he kept walking. Around 9 a.m., he found himself in Buckhead. Buckhead was a different world. This was where Atlanta's money lived. High-rise condos with doormen, restaurants where a single meal cost more than Ezra used to make in a day at the warehouse. People here didn't just look different, they moved different. Confident, unbothered, like the world was built for them and they knew it. Ezra felt out of place immediately. A security guard outside a luxury apartment building watched him with narrowed eyes as he passed. A woman walking her dog crossed to the other side of the street when she saw him coming. He kept his head down and kept moving. That's when he saw the hotel. The Grand Millennium sat on the corner of Peachtree and Piedmont like a monument to wealth. Glass and steel and marble, with a circular driveway where valets in red vests opened doors for guests stepping out of cars that cost more than Ezra would make in 5 years. A banner hung above the entrance, Southeast Tech Innovation Summit, September 19th through 20th. Ezra stopped on the sidewalk across the street and stared at it. He'd heard about events like this, entrepreneurs and investors gathering to talk about startups and funding and the future of technology, a world he'd never been part of, never would be part of. But then he saw something else. Through the glass doors of the hotel, he could see into the lobby. And in the lobby, off to the side near a hallway, he saw tables, long tables covered with white cloth, and on those tables, he saw food. His stomach clenched. Not just hunger, but the sharp, desperate kind of hunger that makes you take risks you wouldn't normally take. Trays of pastries, fruit, coffee, more food than he'd seen in one place in months. Ezra stood there for a long moment, weighing his options. He could walk away, find a soup kitchen, wait until 5 for the Gateway Center, or he could walk into that hotel, slip past the front desk, grab a plate of food, and leave before anyone noticed. The rain started coming down harder. Ezra pulled his hood up and made a decision. He crossed the street. The automatic doors slid open as he approached, and suddenly he was inside. The lobby was warm. The air smelled like coffee and cologne, and something else, something clean and expensive that he couldn't quite name. A woman behind the front desk glanced up at him, and Ezra looked away quickly, walking with purpose like he belonged there, like he had somewhere to be. The food tables were set up in a hallway that led to a ballroom. A sign on an easel read, "Continental Breakfast, Summit Attendees Only." 2 men in suits stood nearby, talking and laughing, balancing plates of croissants and fruit. Neither of them looked at Ezra. He moved toward the tables, trying to look casual, trying to look like someone who hadn't eaten in 20 hours. His hand reached for a plate. "Excuse me." Ezra froze. A man stood beside him, mid-40s, wearing a polo shirt with the hotel logo on it. His name tag read Richard, Event Coordinator. His expression wasn't hostile, just curious. "Are you here for the summit?" he asked. Ezra's mind raced. He could lie, hope the guy didn't ask for credentials, or he could tell the truth and get escorted immediately. He chose honesty. "No, sir, I'm not." Richard studied him for a moment, taking in the worn jacket, the damp jeans, the shoes that seen better days. His face softened slightly. "Then I'm afraid this breakfast is for registered attendees only." "I understand," Ezra said quietly. "I apologize. I'll leave." He turned to go, feeling the familiar weight of shame settling on his shoulders, when Richard spoke again. "Wait." Ezra stopped. Richard glanced around, then lowered his voice. "You hungry?" Ezra hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." Richard looked at him for a long moment, like he was making a calculation in his head. Then he picked up a plate and started loading it with food. Croissants, muffins, grapes, a banana. He grabbed a coffee cup, filled it, added cream and sugar without asking how he took it, and held out both the plate and the cup. "Here, go sit in that corner over there. Eat. Don't draw attention to yourself." Ezra took the plate, hand shaking slightly. "Thank you. Thank you." "Don't mention it. Literally, don't mention it." But he was smiling slightly when he said it. Ezra found a chair in the corner of the lobby, partially hidden behind a large potted plant, and ate. He tried to pace himself, tried not to devour everything in 30 seconds like his body wanted him to. The croissant was buttery and soft, the coffee was hot and strong, the grapes were cold and sweet. Every bite felt like a miracle. He was halfway through the plate when Richard appeared again, this time carrying a folding chair. He set it down across from Ezra and sat. "So, what's your story?" Richard asked. Ezra swallowed a bite of muffin. "My story?" "Yeah, how'd you end up here? And I don't mean in this hotel. I mean, where you are." Most people didn't ask. Most people assumed. Ezra looked at Richard, trying to figure out if this was genuine curiosity or just polite conversation before he got kicked out. But Richard's eyes were steady, waiting. "Lost my job 8 months ago," Ezra said finally. "Couldn't find another one. Couldn't pay rent. Got evicted. Been on the streets since." Richard nodded slowly. "Family?" "Sister in Florida. She's got her own problems." "Friends?" "Used to." Ezra took a sip of coffee. "People get uncomfortable when you're struggling. They don't know what to say, so they just stop talking."
Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You seem articulate, educated. Finished high school, some college, worked in a warehouse for 6 years before everything fell apart." Ezra met his eyes. "I'm not an addict, if that's what you're wondering. I'm not running from the law. I just got unlucky. And once you're down, it's almost impossible to get back up. Nobody hires you without an address. Nobody rents to you without a job. It's a loop that just keeps tightening." Richard leaned back in his chair, processing that. From the ballroom down the hall, Ezra could hear voices. The summit was starting. Someone was speaking into a microphone, their words muffled but energetic. "This summit," Richard said suddenly, "it's entrepreneurs, startup founders, investors, people pitching ideas, looking for funding, telling their stories." He paused. "We have an open mic segment this afternoon, a chance for anyone to get up and share their journey, their struggles, their vision." Ezra frowned slightly. "Okay." "You have a story," Richard said, "a real one, not a polished business pitch deck and projections. Something raw, something true." He leaned forward. "You want to tell it?" Ezra stared at him. "You're asking if I want to get on stage in front of all those people? I'm asking if you have something to say." Ezra's first instinct was to refuse, to say no, to thank Richard for the food and walk away before he embarrassed himself. But then he thought about the notebook in his backpack, the pages filled with words he'd written under overpasses and in doorways, words he'd practiced in the dark when no one was listening,
words about survival and dignity and the refusal to give up. He thought about the promise he'd made to himself outside that club on Edgewood Avenue. If he ever got a chance, he wouldn't waste it. This was a chance. "I don't have a business pitch," Ezra said slowly. "I don't have a startup idea." "That's fine. I have poetry, spoken word, about what it's like, what I've been through." Richard smiled. "That's even better. These people hear business pitches all day. They need to hear something real." Ezra felt his heart start to pound. "When?" 3 o'clock, open mic session. I'll put you on the list." What if I mess up? What if they laugh?" Richard stood, picking up his chair. "Then they laugh. But what if they don't? What if they hear you, really hear you?" He looked down at Ezra. "You've survived 8 months on these streets. You think standing on a stage is scarier than that?" Ezra didn't answer. Richard walked away, back towards the ballroom, leaving Ezra sitting in that corner with an empty plate and a decision to make. Ezra spent the next 5 hours in that hotel lobby, and every minute felt like an eternity. He couldn't leave. If he left, he'd lose his nerve. He'd walk back to the overpass, tell himself it was a stupid idea, that he didn't belong on a stage in front of people who'd judge him the second they saw his clothes. So he stayed. He moved from the corner chair to a bench near the restrooms where he was less visible. He watched people come and go, men and women in business casual, carrying leather portfolios and iPads, talking about market disruption and scalability and venture capital. Their language was foreign to him, but their confidence wasn't. They moved through the world like they owned it. Around noon, Richard found him again and handed him a sandwich wrapped in plastic and another cup of coffee. "You're still here," he said, not quite a question. "I'm still here," Ezra confirmed. "Good. You're on at 3:15. There'll be about 200 people in that ballroom, maybe more." He paused. "Nervous?" "Terrified." Richard laughed. "That means you care. That's good." He started to walk away, then turned back. "Hey, what's your name? I need it for the introduction." "Ezra. Ezra Hollins." Richard nodded. "See you at 3, Ezra." The sandwich sat heavy in Ezra's stomach. He wasn't sure if it was nerves or the fact that his body wasn't used to eating this much in one day. He pulled out his notebook, flipped through the pages, trying to decide which piece to perform. He had dozens, some angry, some sad, some hopeful. Which one would resonate with a room full of people who'd never spent a night on concrete? He settled on one he'd written 3 weeks ago, after a particularly hard day, when a restaurant manager had threatened to call the cops on him for sitting too long on their patio. It was called Invisible. It was raw and honest, and probably too vulnerable, but it was the most true thing he'd written in months. At 2:45, his hands started shaking. At 2:50, he went to the bathroom and splashed water on his face, staring at himself in the mirror. His beard was uneven, his eyes were tired, his shirt had a stain on the collar he hadn't noticed before. He looked exactly like what he was, a homeless man who had no business being here. But Richard had given him a chance, and Ezra had promised himself he wouldn't waste it. At 3 o'clock, he walked towards the ballroom. The doors were open and he could see inside. Rows of chairs, most of them filled. A stage at the front with a podium and a microphone. Large screens on either side displaying the Summit logo. The lighting was professional, bright but not harsh. A woman was on stage mid-pitch, talking about her app that connects freelance designers with small businesses. She was polished, confident. She belonged there. Ezra stood at the back of the room, heart hammering. Richard appeared beside him. "You ready?" "No." "Good answer." Richard handed him a small bottle of water. "You're on at about 10 minutes. There's a guy after this woman, then you. When I call your name, just walk up to the stage. The mic's already on. Just talk into it like you're talking to one person, not 200. Ezra nodded, not trusting his voice. The woman finished her pitch to moderate applause. A man in his 50s took the stage next, talking about blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. Ezra barely heard him. His mind was racing through his piece, making sure he remembered the lines, the rhythm, the pauses. He'd performed this dozens of times alone, but never in front of anyone. What if his voice cracked? What if he forgot the words? What if they started checking their phones halfway through, bored and ready for the next real entrepreneur? The man finished. More applause. Richard stepped onto the stage. "All right, folks, we have one more speaker before our afternoon break," Richard said into the microphone. "This next gentleman isn't here to pitch a startup. He's here to share a story, a perspective that I think is important for all of us to hear, especially in a room focused on innovation and solving problems." He paused. "Please welcome Ezra Hollins." The applause was polite but uncertain. Ezra forced his legs to move. He walked down the center aisle, acutely aware of every eye on him, every subtle lean back as he passed. He climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Richard handed him the microphone with an encouraging nod and stepped aside. Ezra stood there, microphone in hand, staring out at 200 strangers. The lights were brighter than he expected. He could see faces in the first few rows clearly. A woman in a blue blazer, a man with glasses and a skeptical expression, a younger guy who looked like he was fresh out of college. Behind him, the crowd blurred slightly, but he could feel their attention, some curious, some confused, some already deciding he didn't belong. He opened his mouth, and his voice came out quieter than intended. "My name is Ezra Hollins." Someone in the back row coughed. The skeptical man crossed his arms. Ezra cleared his throat, tried again, louder this time. "My name is Ezra Hollins, and I'm not supposed to be here." A few people shifted in their seats. The woman in the blue blazer tilted her head slightly. "I don't have a startup. I don't have a product to pitch. I don't have investors or projections or a path to profitability." He paused, let that settle. "What I do have is 8 months of living on the streets of Atlanta, 8 months of being invisible, 8 months of surviving in a city that's growing and thriving while I'm just trying to find my next meal." The room was quieter now. People stopped shifting. Phones stayed in pockets. "I walked 3 miles to get here this morning, not because I had a ticket, not because I thought I'd be welcome. I walked here because I was hungry, and I thought maybe there'd be food." He gestured slightly toward the back of the room. "A man named Richard showed me kindness, fed me, and then asked me if I had something to say." He could see Richard standing near the door, arms crossed, watching. "So I'm gonna say it, not as a pitch, not as a plea, just as truth." Ezra closed his eyes for a brief moment, centered himself, and began. "You see me and think you know my story. Addict, lazy, failure, someone who gave up, someone who chose this. But you don't see the warehouse job I lost through no fault of my own. You don't see the 3 months I spent applying everywhere, begging for a chance. You don't see the eviction notice I couldn't fight. You don't see the friends who stopped returning my calls. You don't see the shelter beds that were full. You don't see the nights I spent cold and scared, wondering if this is how my life ends." His voice was gaining strength now, finding the rhythm he'd practiced alone in the dark. "You see me on the street, and you look away. You clutch your bag tighter. You cross to the other side. You tell yourself I'm not your problem. And maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm just one more invisible person in a city full of them. But I'm still here, still fighting, still refusing to disappear." The woman in the blue blazer was leaning forward now. The skeptical man had uncrossed his arms. "I didn't come up here to beg for your money. I didn't come up here for your pity. I came up here because I've spent 8 months being invisible, and I'm tired of it. I came up here because I have something to offer that's more valuable than a business plan. I have a voice. I have a story. I have words I've written in notebooks under overpasses, words I've practiced when no one was listening, words I've held on to because they're the only thing I have left that's mine." He paused, let the silence breathe for a moment. "You all came here to talk about innovation, about disruption, about building something from nothing. Well, let me tell you about building from nothing. Building is waking up every morning on concrete and deciding not to give up. Building is walking miles in shoes that are falling apart because you can't afford new ones. Building is honing a skill, writing words, practicing your craft even when there's no guarantee anyone will ever hear it. That's building. That's what I've been doing for 8 months. The room was completely still now. Not a phone in sight, not a whisper. I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm asking you to see me, really see me. Not as a problem, not as a statistic, but as someone who's been preparing for a moment like this, even when I had no idea if it would ever come. I didn't get lucky today. I got ready. And when Richard gave me this chance, I took it because I've spent too long being invisible.
Ezra's voice dropped slightly, more intimate now. This isn't a pitch. This is a promise to myself that I won't beg for what I need. I'll build toward it. I'll work for it. I'll prove that I'm worth more than the circumstances I'm in. And maybe someone in this room will see that. Will understand that success isn't just about who has the best idea or the most funding. It's about who refuses to quit even when everything is stacked against them. He looked out at the crowd, met a few eyes directly. So here I am, Ezra Hollins, homeless, hungry, but not broken, not invisible anymore. And if you take nothing else from what I said, take this. Preparation doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't wait for perfect circumstances. It happens in the dark, in the struggle, when nobody's watching. And when your moment comes, if your moment comes, you better be ready. He lowered the microphone, unsure what else to say, unsure if he'd said too much or not enough. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. Then someone started clapping. It started with one person, a man in the 5th row, standing up, hands coming together in slow, deliberate applause. Then the woman in the blue blazer joined him. Then the college-aged kid. Then the skeptical man who'd had his arms crossed. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet. 200 people standing and clapping for a homeless man who'd walked 3 miles in worn-out shoes to get there. Ezra stood frozen on that stage, microphone still in his hand, completely unprepared for this reaction. He'd expected polite silence at best, maybe a few pity claps before people moved on with their day. He hadn't expected this. Tears blurred his vision. His throat tightened. He tried to say thank you, but the words wouldn't come. The applause continued. 10 seconds. 15. 20. Some people were wiping their eyes. Others were nodding like Ezra had said something they'd been waiting to hear. Richard was clapping too from the back of the room, a huge grin on his face. Finally, the applause started to fade. People sat back down, but the energy in the room had shifted. It was no longer the polished, professional atmosphere of a tech summit. It felt heavier somehow, more real. Ezra handed the microphone back to Richard, who'd walked up to the stage. "Thank you," Ezra whispered. "No," Richard whispered back. "Thank you." Ezra turned to walk off the stage, legs shaky, adrenaline coursing through him. He'd done it. He'd stood in front of 200 strangers and told his truth, and they'd listened. Actually listened. For the first time in 8 months, someone had seen him. He made it down the steps and started walking toward the back of the ballroom, planning to slip out quietly before anyone could ask him questions he wasn't ready to answer. But before he reached the door, a voice called out, "Excuse me, Ezra." He turned. A man was walking toward him from the front row. Mid-40s, Asian, wearing dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that probably cost more than Ezra used to make in a week. He had the kind of presence that made people move out of his way. Not aggressive, just confident, assured. "I'm David Chen," the man said, extending his hand. Ezra hesitated, suddenly aware of how dirty his own hands probably were, but David didn't seem to care. They shook. David's grip was firm, respectful. "What you just did up there," the man said, gesturing toward the stage, "that took more courage than any pitch I've heard today. Hell, more courage than most things I've seen in my entire career." "Thank you," Ezra said quietly, not sure what else to say. David studied him for a moment, like he was trying to make a decision. Then he said, "Can we talk? Just for a few minutes?" Ezra nodded. David gestured toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the other attendees who were starting to filter out for the afternoon break. They sat in 2 chairs near the side wall. "So," David began, "8 months on the streets. That's not easy." "No, sir, it's not." "But you didn't beg. You built. You practiced your craft even when there was no guarantee it would ever matter." David leaned back slightly. "That's rare. Most people, when they're in survival mode, they stop thinking long term. They just focus on getting through the day. But you kept preparing for something you couldn't even see yet." Ezra wasn't sure where this was going, so he just nodded. David pulled out his phone. "I want to do something, and I need you to hear me out before you say no, all right?" "Okay. I'm going to sponsor you right now. $5,000. Ezra's breath caught. "I'm sorry, what?" $5,000, David repeated calmly. "I'm transferring it to you today, this afternoon." "I don't have a bank account," Ezra finally managed to say. "Then we'll open one," David said simply. "There's a bank 2 blocks from here. We'll go right now if you want." "I don't understand. Why would you—" David held up his hand. "Let me tell you something about myself. 20 years ago, I was broke. Not homeless, but close. I dropped out of college to start a tech company with 2 friends, and we failed, spectacularly. Lost everything. I was sleeping on couches, eating ramen twice a day, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life." He paused. "But I kept coding. Every single day, even when I had no clients, no investors, no proof it would pay off. I kept building." Ezra listened, still trying to wrap his head around the $5,000.
Eventually, I got a meeting with an investor, guy named Tom Rodriguez. I pitched him my second startup idea, and it wasn't great. Honestly, it was mediocre at best. But Tom saw something in me. He saw the preparation, the persistence. He gave me $50,000 when nobody else would. Richard smiled slightly. That company sold for $42 million 6 years later. "That's incredible," Ezra said. "It is. But here's the thing Tom told me when he wrote that check. He said, 'I'm not investing in your idea, David. I'm investing in your refusal to quit.' And that stuck with me. Every investment I've made since then, every person I've mentored, every risk I've taken, it's been based on that principle. Find the people who refuse to quit and bet on them." David looked Ezra directly in the eyes. "You refused to quit. You could have given up. You could have let those 8 months destroy you. But instead, you kept writing, kept practicing, kept preparing. And when your moment came, you were ready. That's who I invest in." Before Ezra could respond, someone else approached. A woman in her 30s, wearing a gray pantsuit holding a business card. "Excuse me, Ezra. I'm Jennifer Michaels. I run a nonprofit that helps people transitioning out of homelessness find employment." She handed him the card. "I'd love to talk to you about opportunities. We have positions open, and honestly, after hearing you speak, I think you'd be an incredible asset." Ezra took the card, still stunned. Then another person, a man in his 50s. "Ezra, I'm Robert Tanner. I own 3 apartment buildings in Midtown. I'd like to offer you a place to stay, rent-free for 3 months while you get back on your feet." Then another, "I'm Sarah Kim. I run a clothing company. Let me get you some proper clothes, no charge." Then another, and another. Within 10 minutes, a small crowd had gathered around Ezra, people offering help, offering resources, offering opportunities. Someone handed him a laptop bag with a laptop inside. Someone else offered to pay for a phone and a year of service. A woman who ran a barbershop offered free haircuts for life. A man who owned a gym offered a free membership. Richard appeared with a notepad, writing everything down because Ezra couldn't keep track. His hands were shaking. His eyes were wet. He kept trying to say thank you, but the words felt inadequate. David stood beside him the whole time, a steady presence. When the crowd finally dispersed, when people started returning to the summit, David put a hand on Ezra's shoulder. "Do you know what this is?" David asked quietly.
Ezra shook his head, overwhelmed. This is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. This is what happens when you refuse to beg and choose to build instead. You didn't ask these people for anything, Ezra. You showed them who you are, and they responded. Ezra finally found his voice. I don't know how to thank you, any of you. Don't thank me. Just promise me something. Anything. 6 months from now, when you're back on your feet, find someone who's where you are today and give them what I'm giving you. Not necessarily money, but a chance, an opportunity, belief. David smiled. That's how this works. Someone believed in me. Now I'm believing in you. Someday you will believe in someone else. Ezra nodded, unable to speak. David checked his watch. Bank closes at 5. We should go now if we're going to open that account. Right now? Right now. They left the hotel together. David's car was a Tesla, sleek and black, parked in the VIP section. Ezra felt strange getting into it, his worn clothes against the leather seats, but David didn't seem to notice or care. They drove to a Bank of America 2 blocks from the hotel. Inside, David explained the situation to a bank manager, a woman named Patricia, who didn't blink twice when she saw Ezra. Within 30 minutes, Ezra had a checking account, his first bank account in 8 months. Patricia handed him a temporary debit card and explained how online banking worked. David pulled out his phone. What's your account number? Ezra read it off the paper Patricia had given him. David typed quickly, then showed Ezra his screen. A transfer confirmation. $5,000. Sent. It'll clear in a few minutes, David said. Ezra stared at the screen, at the numbers that represented more money than he'd seen in almost a year. I don't know what to say. You already said it. On that stage, you told your story. You showed people what building looks like even in the hardest circumstances. Now you take that $5,000 and build something real with it. Not for me, for yourself. They drove back to the hotel. The summit was wrapping up for the day. People were filing out, heading to their cars, to their hotels, to their comfortable lives. Ezra stood on the sidewalk, bank card in his pocket, business cards in his hand, feeling like he just lived through something impossible. Richard found him before he left. So, hell of a day, huh? I can't believe any of this is real. It's real, and you earned it. Richard handed him a piece of paper. That's my number. You need anything? A reference, help navigating resources, someone to vouch for you? Call me. Thank you for everything, for the food, for the chance. Richard shrugged. I just opened a door. You walked through it. Now, here's something I want you to think about. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt invisible, where it seemed like nobody saw your struggle or your effort, drop a comment and tell me about it. Because Ezra's story is powerful, but it's not unique. There are people everywhere preparing in silence, building in the dark, waiting for their moment. And I want to hear your story too. Ezra didn't go back to the overpass that night.
Robert Tanner, the man who'd offered him an apartment, met him outside the hotel at 6 p.m. with keys to a studio in Midtown. It wasn't large, maybe 400 square feet, but it had a bed, a bathroom with a working shower, a small kitchen, and windows that let in actual sunlight. Robert handed him the keys without ceremony, just a firm handshake and a simple statement. 3 months, rent-free. After that, we'll figure something out based on where you're at. Ezra stood in the doorway of that apartment for a full minute before stepping inside. The carpet was clean, the walls were white, there was a small couch, a table with 2 chairs, and a bed with actual sheets and a comforter. He set his backpack down slowly, like the whole thing might disappear if he moved too fast. He walked to the bathroom and stared at himself in the mirror. Same tired eyes, same uneven beard, same worn face. But something was different. He wasn't invisible anymore. He turned on the shower, the first real shower he'd have in 8 months, and stood under the hot water until his skin turned red and his fingers pruned. He washed away layers of dirt and sweat and shame. He stood there and cried, great heaving sobs that he'd been holding in for months, letting the water carry it all down the drain. When he finally got out, he dried off with a towel that smelled like detergent and fabric softener, normal things he'd forgotten existed. He put on the same worn clothes because they were all he had,
But tomorrow, Sarah Kim was meeting him to take him shopping for new ones. He sat on the couch, pulled out his phone, still barely alive, battery at 4%, and looked at the business cards people had given him. Jennifer Michaels from the employment nonprofit, Robert Tanner's property management company, Sarah Kim's clothing line, Richard's personal number, and David Chen's card, simple and elegant, just his name and phone number embossed in black. Ezra plugged his phone into a charger, Robert had left one on the counter, and watched the battery percentage slowly climb. Such a small thing, such a normal thing. But 8 months without it had made him forget how much easier life was when you could make a call, send a message, look up information whenever you needed it. He opened his notebook, the one he'd carried through rain and heat and cold, and flipped to a blank page. He needed to write this down while it was fresh, while he could still feel the disbelief and gratitude and overwhelming sense of possibility. Today, I stood on a stage. Today, I stopped being invisible. But even as he wrote it, even as he sat in an apartment that didn't feel real yet, a thought nagged at him. How many people were still under that overpass tonight? How many were still walking the streets of downtown, still fighting to survive, still practicing their crafts in the dark with no guarantee their moment would ever come? He'd gotten lucky today. No, not lucky. He'd been prepared and he'd been given an opportunity. But what about the others? David's words echoed in his head. 6 months from now, when you're back on your feet, find someone who's where you are today and give them what I'm giving you. Ezra closed the notebook and made himself a promise. This wasn't just about him getting back on his feet. This was about making sure he didn't forget where he'd been, about making sure that when he made it, if he made it, he'd reach back and pull someone else up. The next morning, Ezra woke up in an actual bed for the first time in 8 months. The sunlight coming through the window felt like a revelation. He lay there for a moment, half convinced he'd wake up under the overpass and discover yesterday had been a dream. But the apartment was real. The keys on the table were real. His phone, now fully charged, was real. At 9 a.m., Sarah Kim picked him up. She drove him to a department store in Buckhead and spent 2 hours helping him pick out clothes, jeans that fit properly, shirts that didn't have stains or tears, a decent jacket, new shoes that didn't have holes in the soles, socks, underwear, normal things that felt like luxuries. "How much do I owe you?" Ezra asked at the register, watching the total climb. Sarah waved him off. "Consider it an investment. You're going to do big things, Ezra. I can feel it." "I'm going to pay you back," he insisted. "Then pay it forward," she said, echoing David's words from yesterday.
At noon, he met with Jennifer Michaels at a coffee shop downtown. She ordered him lunch, a sandwich and soup that he ate slowly, still not used to having regular meals, and explained what her nonprofit did. "We work with people transitioning out of homelessness," Jennifer explained. "We help with job placement, resume building, interview prep, financial literacy. We also partner with local businesses who are willing to give people a real chance." She slid a folder across the table. "I have 3 job opportunities for you, all entry-level, but they pay decent wages and offer room for growth." Ezra looked through the folder. A position at a tech company doing customer support, a job at a marketing firm as an administrative assistant, a role at a nonprofit similar to Jennifer's, helping others navigate the resources he'd just started learning about. "The third one," he said, pointing to the nonprofit position. "I want that one." Jennifer smiled. "I thought you might. It pays less than the other 2, but—" "I don't care about that," Ezra interrupted gently. "I want to help people. I want to do what you're doing, what David's doing. Give people chances." "Then the job's yours. You start Monday." Monday. 3 days away. 3 days to process everything that happened, to prepare for this new chapter, to remember what it felt like to have purpose again. Over the weekend, Ezra did something he hadn't done in months. He went back downtown, not to sleep under the overpass, but to find the people who were still there. He brought food, sandwiches and bottles of water he'd bought with some of David's money. He brought socks and blankets Sarah had helped him pick out. And he brought something more important than any of that. He brought his story. He sat with people under that overpass, People he'd seen before but never really talked to. A woman named Teresa, who'd been on the streets for 2 years. A man named James, who'd lost his construction job after an injury. A younger guy named Marcus, the name made Ezra smile slightly, who'd aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. He told them what had happened to him, not to brag, but to show them it was possible, that preparation mattered, that building in the dark mattered, that refusing to give up mattered. "What were you preparing?" Teresa asked him, "before you got your chance?" "I was writing, spoken word poetry, practicing it every night even though nobody was listening." "I used to draw," Teresa said quietly, "before all this. Haven't touched a pencil in a year." Ezra reached into his backpack and pulled out a small sketchbook and a set of pencils he'd bought that morning. He handed them to her. "Start again. You never know when your moment's coming." Teresa took them, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." James spoke up. "I was good with my hands, built things, fixed things. But who's going to hire a guy with no tools and no address?" "Someone will. I'll help you. I know people now, people who believe in second chances." He pulled out Jennifer's card. "Tell them you call this number Monday. Tell them I sent you." For the next 2 hours, Ezra sat with them, listened to their stories, offered what help he could, phone numbers, resources, encouragement. He couldn't fix everything. He couldn't give them all what David gave him, but he could remind them they weren't invisible, that someone saw them, that someone believed they could build their way out of this. When he left that afternoon, Teresa called after him. "Ezra, you coming back?" He turned. "Every weekend, I promise." And he meant it. By Sunday night, as Ezra sat in his apartment preparing for his first day of work, he realized something profound. What happened on that stage wasn't just about him getting help. It was about him learning that the world was full of people like David Chen and Richard and Jennifer and Sarah, people who were waiting for someone to invest in, someone to believe in, someone who'd proven they wouldn't quit. But it was also full of people like Teresa and James and Marcus, people who were still in the dark, still building, still preparing, still hoping their moment would come. Ezra had been both, and now he had a responsibility to be the bridge between them. His phone buzzed. A text from David. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" He typed back, "Nervous, grateful, ready." 3 dots appeared. Then, "That's the perfect combination. You're going to do great. Coffee this week?" "Absolutely." Ezra set his phone down and looked around the apartment, at the bed he'd sleep in tonight, at the clothes hanging in the closet, at the job offer letter on the table, at the notebook filled with words that had carried him through the hardest 8 months of his life. None of this was luck. Luck didn't write those poems. Luck didn't practice in the dark. Luck didn't refuse to give up when everything was falling apart. Luck didn't walk 3 miles to a hotel in Buckhead. Luck didn't take the stage when every instinct said to run. That was preparation. That was choice. That was the refusal to beg when he could build instead. And if you're sitting there right now, wondering if your preparation matters, wondering if anyone will ever see the work you're doing in the dark, let me tell you something. It matters. Every hour you spend honing your craft, every moment you choose to build instead of giving up, every time you prepare for an opportunity you can't even see yet, it all matters. Because your stage is coming. Your moment is coming. And when it does, the only question that will matter is this: are you ready? Ezra was ready, and that made all the difference. If this story is resonating with you, if you see yourself in Ezra's journey, do me a favor right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss stories like this, and drop a comment telling me what you're preparing for right now, even if you can't see the opportunity yet. I read every single comment, and your story matters too. 6 months later, Ezra stood in front of a conference room at the nonprofit where he now worked, looking at 12 people who reminded him exactly of where he'd been. They were part of a program Jennifer had expanded, a workshop series for people transitioning out of homelessness, focused not just on finding jobs, but on recognizing and developing the skills they already had. Ezra had helped design the curriculum, Today was his first time leading a session alone. "My name is Ezra Hollins," and he saw a few people glance at each other, recognizing the name. His story had spread over the past few months. Local news had picked it up, a few blogs had written about it, and Jennifer's nonprofit had used it in their fundraising materials. Ezra didn't love the attention, but he understood its value. If his story could open doors for others, he'd tell it 1,000 times. 6 months ago, I was living under the I-85 overpass. No job, no home, no idea if things would ever get better. Today, I'm standing here because I refused to stop building even when I had nothing. He spent the next hour walking them through his journey, not the sanitized version, but the real one. The hunger, the shame, the nights he wanted to give up, the notebook he'd carried and the poems he'd written when no one was listening, the decision to walk into that hotel, the terror of standing on that stage, the moment everything changed. But more importantly, he spent time on what came after, the hard work of rebuilding, the therapy sessions Jennifer had connected him with to process 8 months of trauma, the financial literacy classes that taught him how to manage money after years of just surviving, the moments of imposter syndrome when he'd sit in his apartment and wonder if he deserved any of this. It didn't end when I got off that stage. Getting the opportunity was just the beginning. Building something sustainable from it, that's been the real work. A woman in the back raised her hand. "How did you know what to prepare like? How did you know poetry would matter?" Ezra smiled. "I didn't. That's the thing about preparation. You don't always know what it's for. I wrote poetry because it kept me sane, because it reminded me I was still a person with something to offer. I practiced because it was the one thing I could control when everything else was chaos." He paused. The specific skill matters less than the act of building. Whether it's poetry or drawing or coding or woodworking or cooking, whatever it is, develop it. Make it excellent. Because when your opportunity comes, excellence is what transforms a moment into a future. Another hand, a younger man, maybe 25. What if the opportunity never comes? It was the question Ezra had asked himself 100 times under that overpass. He answered honestly. Then you're still better off than if you'd done nothing. You still have a skill, you still have dignity, you still have proof that you didn't give up. Ezra leaned against the table. But I'll tell you something I've learned. Opportunities come more often than we think. We just don't always recognize them because they don't look the way we expected. That hotel? I walked in looking for food, not a stage. If I hadn't been prepared, if I hadn't had something to offer, that would have been just another meal. Instead, it changed my life. The session ended with Ezra handing each person a notebook, the same kind he'd carried, and a pen. Start writing your story, or drawing it, or planning it. Whatever form your building takes, start today, not tomorrow, today. After they left, Jennifer found him in the conference room, packing up his materials. "You're good at this." "It doesn't feel like work," Ezra admitted. "It feels like paying a debt." "You don't owe anyone anything, Ezra. What happened to you, you earned that." "Maybe, but I also got lucky that Richard was kind, that David was in that room, that people chose to help." Ezra zipped up his bag. "The least I can do is make sure I'm that person for someone else." Jennifer smiled. "David called me yesterday. He wants to fund an expansion of this program. Hire 3 more people to do what you're doing. Reach more people." "That's incredible." "He wants you to help interview candidates. Said you'll know who has what it takes." Ezra nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that responsibility. 6 months ago, he couldn't get anyone to hire him. Now he was helping decide who got hired. The irony wasn't lost on him. That evening, Ezra met David for dinner. They'd been meeting once a month since that day at the summit, and what had started as a mentor-mentee relationship had evolved into something closer to friendship. "So Jennifer told you about the expansion," David said over appetizers. "She did, thank you. This is going to change a lot of lives." He waved that off. "It's just money. You're the one changing lives.
I'm just removing barriers." He took a sip of water. "Speaking of which, I have something else I want to run by you." "Okay." "There's a tech conference in Austin next month, bigger than the one where we met. I'm speaking on a panel about social entrepreneurship, and I want you to come with me, share your story with a larger audience."
Ezra's first instinct was to refuse. The idea of standing on an even bigger stage, in front of even more people, still terrified him. But then he thought about Teresa, who was now selling her drawings at a local art market, about James, who'd gotten a job with a construction company after Jennifer connected him with resources, about Marcus, who'd enrolled in community college and was studying to be a social worker. None of them would have those opportunities if Ezra had let fear win on that stage 6 months ago. "I'll do it," Ezra said. David grinned. "I knew you would. But I want to bring someone with me." "Who?" "Teresa, the woman I told you about, the artist. She's been selling her work, saving money, building something real. I think she needs to see that world, needs to know she belongs in rooms like that." David didn't hesitate. "Done. I'll cover her travel and hotel too." This was what David did. He didn't just help one person. He created ripples. Ezra was determined to do the same. The following weekend, Ezra went back to the overpass like he did every Saturday. The group had grown. Word had spread that someone who'd made it out was coming back, bringing food and resources, and most importantly, hope. He sat with them for hours, listened to their stories, connected people with resources, handed out notebooks and art supplies and business cards for people who could help. He didn't have all the answers and he couldn't fix everything, but he could be present. He could see them. As the sun started to set, a young woman approached him. She looked nervous, clutching a folder against her chest. "Are you Ezra?" she asked quietly. "I am. I heard about what you did at that tech summit, how you performed your poetry and it changed everything." She held out the folder carefully. "I write too, stories, fiction. I've been working on a novel for 2 years, writing in libraries and shelters whenever I can. I don't know if it's any good, but I wanted someone to see it, someone who'd understand." Ezra took the folder carefully, like it was something precious, because it was. This was her notebook, her preparation, her refusal to give up. "What's your name?" he asked. "Olivia." "Olivia, I promise you I'll read this, every word, and then we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to help you figure out what to do with it." He met her eyes. "You're a writer, not a homeless person who writes. A writer. Don't forget that." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." After she walked away, Ezra opened the folder. The first page was a title page, Invisible Voices by Olivia Chen. He read the first paragraph, then the first page, then the first chapter. By the time he looked up, it was dark and most people had dispersed. She could write, really write. The prose was raw but powerful, the story compelling. This wasn't just preparation, this was talent. Ezra pulled out his phone and texted David. "I found someone you need to meet." 3 dots appeared. "Tell me about them." Ezra typed out Olivia's story, how she'd been writing a novel while homeless, how she'd approached him with her work, and how good it actually was. David's response came quickly. "Bring her to the office Monday. I know some people in publishing." And just like that, another door opened. Another person would get their moment. Another opportunity would meet preparation. Ezra walked back to his apartment that night. His apartment, still surreal to think about, and sat down at his desk. He'd been working on something for weeks now, a longer piece about his journey, about the 8 months under the overpass, about the stage, about everything that came after. He was thinking about turning it into a book. David had already offered to connect him with his publisher. But tonight, he just wanted to write. Not for publication, not for an audience, just for himself. The way he used to, under that overpass when no one was watching. He opened his notebook, not the worn one from the streets, but a new one, clean and full of possibility, and wrote, "Preparation is an act of faith. You do the work without knowing if it will matter. You build in the dark without knowing if anyone will ever see what you've built. You refuse to give up even when giving up would be easier, kinder, more rational. And then one day, if you're lucky, no, if you're ready, your moment comes and everything changes. Not because you got lucky, but because you were prepared for luck when it arrived." He paused, pen hovering over the page, and then added one more line. "This is the story I needed to hear when I had nothing. So I'm telling it now for everyone who's still in their dark place, still building, still preparing. Your stage is coming. Be ready for it." So let me ask you something. What are you preparing for right now? What skill are you developing when no one's watching? What are you building in your dark place, hoping that it will matter someday? Because it will. Your moment is coming. And when it does, the only question that will matter is whether you're ready. Ezra was ready. And that changed everything. If this story moved you, if it shifted something in how you think about preparation and opportunity and refusing to give up, do 3 things for me right now. First, hit that like button. Second, subscribe to this channel because I bring you stories like this every single week, stories that will change how you see success and resilience and life itself. And third, drop a comment right now. Tell me what you're preparing for. Tell me what you're building in the dark. Tell me your story, because I read every single comment, and your story matters just as much as Ezra's. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to Ezra's journey. And remember, your stage is coming. Be ready for it. I'll see you in the next one.